While aimlessly wandering across the internet as I usually do, at some point I started reading Wikipedia articles about the most something animals in the world. For example, the biggest animal, the smallest, the longest living, and many more like that. And for the longest living animal, the answer Google gives is actually ocean quahog, which is like a sea clam, and also it gives the answer of some sea sponges. Which is cool, of course, and they reportedly live up to 10,000 years, which means they are organisms that have been alive when the Egyptian pyramids were being built. But I was looking for like a full-on big real animal, if you know what I mean. And the answer for that turned out to be the Greenland shark. The wiki page for the Greenland shark says that their estimated lifespan is between 272 and 512 years. They are not only very long living, they're also just very long in general, reaching like 6.5 meters, 21 foot for the American folks, which is like the height of a 2-story house from top to bottom. Another fun thing I learned is that they apparently reach sexual maturity around 150 years of age. So I guess the sharks that are young and ready to mate right now have been born around the time when the light bulb was invented by Thomas Edison. Or maybe not by him, actually. I always heard that he stole a big chunk of his inventions, but maybe that's a rabbit hole for another video. Anyways, back to the sharks. When reading all of this, I had a question pop up in my mind. How do we even know that their expected lifespan is from 270 to 500 something years old? Clearly, no scientist is going to outlive one of these things to just test when it dies of old age. So as usual, I googled it, and I found a 2016 study that determined this estimation. What they did for the study was first, obviously, sourced themselves some sharks. I must add, according to the study, all sharks were bycatch that could not have been released back because they sustained too heavy of an injury, so the sourcing was pretty ethically correct. Anyways, after they got the sharks, they immediately killed them, cut out their eyes, and stored the eyes in a minus 20-degree freezer, which is pretty crazy. After the eyes were delivered to the lab, the scientists performed a delicate dissection to isolate the eye lens nucleus, like the very center of the lens that forms during the embryonic development and remains chemically unchanged throughout the life of the shark, which basically means that this specific element of the shark's eye was unchanged since it formed as a baby. And that is why if you determine the age of this eye lens, you determine the age of the shark itself. So how do the scientists go about finding the age of this eye part thing? The answer is actually radiocarbon dating. It's actually the same process that was used to determine the age of the Otzi the Iceman, which you might have heard of, and it intrigued me enough to look up how it actually works. So the simplified way to explain it is this. Basically, there are a few variations of the carbon atom, but to understand radiocarbon dating, we need to know about two. The default carbon atom, the standard one, is the carbon-12. It's stable and it stays the same forever. There's also kind of a wild radioactive carbon atom, the carbon-14. It's unstable, and over a very long and predictable amount of time, it decays, breaks down back into nitrogen. What's important here is that we know the half-time of carbon-14, so we know exactly how fast it decays. So the thing is, we know the default ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-14 in the atmosphere. But if you seal something containing the default ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-14 for a period of time, over that time the carbon-12 amount will stay the same, while the amount of carbon-14 will decrease because it is unstable and it decays. And because the eye lens nucleus of the Greenland shark actually is sealed from birth, it is perfect for radiocarbon dating. So basically what we do is we pop open that eye and count the ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-14 inside. I also tried looking up how do we even count the individual carbon-14 atoms Turns out we use something called the accelerator mass spectrometer, which looks like this. I tried understanding how it works and what it does, but I would be lying if I said that I did. And it's kind of no longer surface level information, so it got pretty boring for me pretty quick. But reading about it did point me towards something not so boring. As I said before, this apparatus basically measures the ratio of carbon 12 to carbon 14. And you know what recently happened that have massively increased the amount of carbon 14 in the atmosphere and in organic tissue? Blowing up a bunch of nukes during the Cold War. So basically, the ratio of carbon 12 to carbon 14 was always stable. Because on one hand, carbon 14 was always decaying into nitrogen, and on the other, new carbon 14 is constantly created by cosmic rays. Cosmic rays are mostly like high-speed protons coming from the sun and distant stars, and when they slam into the Earth upper atmosphere, the stratosphere, they collide with atmospheric atoms and shatter them, releasing a shower of subatomic particles, including neutrons, and creating new carbon 14 atoms in the process. But between 1955 and 1963, various nations concluded massive atmospheric nuclear weapon tests, as you know, and these explosions released an enormous number of neutrons into the atmosphere, the same process that creates the carbon 14 atom naturally from cosmic rays, but on a much more violent and concentrated scale. As a result, the amount of carbon 14 in the atmosphere nearly doubled in less than a decade, and we see that very well when performing radiocarbon dating. This phenomenon actually has a pretty sick name, the bomb pulse. On this graph you can clearly see the carbon 14 spike during the 60s and how it's slowly returning to its natural level over time. And we see the bomb pulse even in the eyes of young Greenland sharks, right? If the shark was born after the bomb pulse occurred, it will have a much higher concentration of carbon 14 in its organic tissue than the shark whose eyes were sealed off well before all the nuclear explosions. Of course, it's a bit of a stretch to say that all of the information and facts I've talked about are really meaningfully connected. There's no real plot or conclusion to tie all of this together. But I always found it fascinating how closely everything in the world seems to be connected sometimes. Whenever I start looking into something, I always have this little wonder about which Wikipedia article I'm going to end up at the end, and I truly never know. In just a few links and connections, the topic changes entirely, and only you know why the article you ended up on is even connected to your initial search. It's like a 6 handshakes rule, but for information. I hope to make some more videos just like this one in the future, and hopefully, when my quality improves over time, someone will find the topics I talk about as interesting as I do. Thank you for watching.